Hello, everyone, and welcome to this, the third in our series of video recordings with AxiCom, entitled Being Human in a Tech-Enabled World. And this third in the series is on learning, particularly how to onboard, mentor, and take care of young people and new joiners in the industry, as we're all working in still in very strange remote and at best hybrid ways. So I've got three great guests today. First up, I've got Aaron Varela, who's a vice president at AxiCom. Hi, Aaron, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
We've also from AxiCom, we've got Emily Denton, and Ted, who's looking very smart with a tie, is also joining us on the call. So welcome, Emily and Ted. Emily's an account supervisor at AxiCom. And finally, we've got Michael Cooper, executive coach, nicknamed Coop, who's very kindly joined us to talk about kind of the bigger picture of how this is all playing out now in the in industry in general, and looking after our people. So welcome Coop to the call.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
So let's just, I mean, the premise of this is that, you know, a lot of people are starting new jobs and haven't actually met any of their colleagues in the flesh now. That seems to be kind of normal, which is, if somebody had said that to you 2 years ago, I'm sure everyone would have just gone, no, this is literally impossible to do, but there we are, strange times. It's also become achievable. Plenty of companies are growing. There's obviously a massive fight for talent at the moment, as we're all experiencing, but there's obviously some issues with this as well. Some stuff is missing in terms of our human contact that we need to bring people into the business, how we make sure that they're embedded into the culture of the business, how they understand the culture of the business when they've never met their colleagues even. So there's loads of big stuff to talk about here. And first of all, I'd like to kick off with who thrives and who struggles with remote work. Is it dependent on your experience, your personality, your age, something else, a bit of everything? Aaron, from your experience as a senior person at AxiCom, who have you seen who copes best and who's not coped so well over the last 18 months or so?
Yeah, actually, I think that's a very hard question to answer, because people's circumstances are all different, and we were equally thrusted into, you know, these new ways of working. And even if you were someone who traditionally worked from home, you know, the pressures and the stresses of COVID and understanding, you know, the changing dynamic of your agency culture and how, you know, this world was impacting your staff, I think was a lot for a lot of folks to kind of handle. You know, we've all been in the process of trying to come to terms with these new ways of working. And, you know, ultimately, I think there are some silver linings in it. To be honest, I think there's been some opportunities where we've kind of broken the traditional mold of work. And it makes everyone have to rethink, you know, what their ideas of work were. What was the traditional 9 to 5? What does that look like? Is that a real thing anymore? I think it's still something that we're all trying to navigate through. But I can't necessarily say that, you know, one group or the other has traditionally thrived or has struggled through this. I think it's a moment of adaptability. It's a moment of all of us to take some reflection and really rethink the way things were done in the past and try to move forward from there.
Thanks, Aaron. And Coop, on a more general basis, the people you're coaching and working with, who are you seeing has coped best, and where are potential trouble spots, if you like?
It's, you know, COVID is probably the biggest leadership challenge that any of us have faced. And so I agree with Aaron, this, you know, moment of adaptability that we're all going through. Traditionally, the organizations that were remote, kind of all remote, are thriving really well now because they really didn't have to change anything. It's the folks who really are trying to figure out, how do I adapt? How do I add on the things that I would do in person via remote channels? And particularly for those folks who were new to organizations, how do we really onboard them? How do we actually teach them what the culture is when we don't have the luxury of that face-to-face, the gatherings, the side conversations, those sorts of things? So nearly everyone who was in a traditional face-to-face organization struggled somewhat over the last 18 months to adapt to those sorts of things. But there are practices from organizations that were remote only that we can really think about. One of the main things I always tell my clients is, suppose you could never work in the same room again. How would you onboard? How would you think about training people about your culture? How would you think about having your one-on-ones and those sorts of things? And when we get out of our mindset of this is the way I've always done it, so I've got to adapt, to, oh wow, this is an entirely new paradigm that we're working in. That means we have to rethink some of the things we've done before. Sometimes, it's as simple as changing the conversation you have in regular one-on-one check-ins, those sorts of things. So it can be simple, but nearly everyone has struggled. I have clients who raised $80 million, having their best year yet. It's kind of amazing to see that some organizations are really flourishing, and part of that has to do with their market and specifically how they rethought their normal operations. And some, particularly those that were remote, just didn't have to make any changes. So they were in an advantageous position.
Yeah, thanks, Kip. I mean, it's very, it depends where you were at the start, a lot of this, doesn't it, really? It's different from company to company, sector to sector. Emily, what's your experience been as a relatively young person, sort of at the start end of your career? Because you've actually, I know you've been promoted in lockdown, well done, but what's your experience been like?
For me, my experience has been very unique in that I was with AxiCom for 6 years before this all happened. So I got a really great experience of what this company is about. So, but even as someone with that experience, you still struggled, and I still miss that company culture. And I think, so it doesn't matter if you're new or a vice president or starting as an intern, I think we all really struggled during this time because PR is a really hard job to do. But what makes it worth it is the team. I've always said that you can do hard work anywhere. It's the people you're working hard for. And you miss that when you're not in office and those little conversations aren't sparked here and there. And there's not as much of that personal connection. It's all very work, work, work. And so I think that no matter your level, no matter you as a person, we all struggled in some very unique way throughout this pandemic.
So, Aaron, from your experience of looking after lots of teams of all ages and sizes, what do you think the biggest challenges have been for young people and people entering the industry and new joiners to business in general?
Yeah, I think Emily touched a little bit about it. It's, really identifying and connecting and acclimating to agency culture, right? We were defined in one way, and then COVID kind of completely rejiggered all of that. So it's been about trying to get people to feel, that company culture. And, we go as far as to send gift packages to folks at AxiCom. We get them set up with the latest and greatest technology, thanks to our clients at Dell. Everything from, we send them masks, branded masks to protect themselves. And so it's trying to bring that company culture to life, regardless of where they're working. I think the other part of it is in the way that we define our office structure. Like, we don't necessarily do that anymore by offices. It's by regionality and where we have people on the ground. And so, we say we have offices, but we've got people all over the country. And, we're very good at talking about that flexibility, keeping that transparency when we are talking about, career growth and career development, the ability to, have flexibility in their workday. We recognize that the construct of work is very different. And, we have, as a leadership team, need to stay on top of that and be able to communicate that to anyone who's coming in to the agency, and recognize that, these are uncharted waters that we're still navigating through. And even when we think we're getting ahead of it, we have to continue to keep our eye on the ball, because things are ever changing. So there's a lot of fluidity, a lot of agility in that. But I think the key point there is to remain transparent, over communicate, and let people know that this is what defines us, right? I had the great opportunity to help refine our purpose statement. A lot of that, we look to inspire people by translating the impact of technology. And a lot of what people are doing now is, you know, we have to ground them in that belief system. We have to make sure that they feel like they're a part of that and that they have a stake in that. And that starts the moment they, you know, they accept that offer letter and they come on board.
So what specific things has AxiCom been doing to support new joiners, young people progressing in their career through lockdown,
Sure.
mentoring, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, right off the bat, when we were thrusted into the new world of the pandemic era, it was making sure that our teams were safe, right? And making sure people were equipped with things that they needed. Everyone was struggling to get masks. So we did a branded, as I mentioned, a branded AxiCom mask, which is great. You know, we are in every week we are sending out newsletters about you know, some of the changing dynamics where our offices are on a state by state level, how our case is sort of looking, what do office reopenings look like. You know, every staff meeting that we're having, we are addressing sort of where we are as an agency in terms of offices reopening and how we're kind of paying close attention to you know, changing dynamics on a state by state level. From a career pathing and a career development perspective, we rolled out Axie Academy, which is really our training arm and our opportunity to continue to keep our staff trained, up to date. You know, everything from presentation training to writing training. I mean, all of this stuff was rolled out during the pandemic and has been happening in virtual form. You know, we did the typical stuff that most agencies have done, like the virtual happy hours and things like that, which are always fun. But you know, it's making sure that we're carving out a path for folks, letting them know that they can trust the agency, they have resources at their disposal. We've even brought in people like Coop to put on some sessions. His grit and resiliency training was amazing for us and really helped a lot of our staff sort of look inside and recognize and raise their hands and say, we're all struggling with some things here and there as we kind of deal with the world, you know, in the pandemic era. So there's been lots of stuff that's been going on. There's more things happening on the horizon. You know, even as we're looking at office reopening, and some of our offices have shifted and moved to new locations. Other offices have been totally renovated and are coming back, you know, full steam ahead. It's about branding and making people feel that when they do enter the office setting again, that they feel like they are a part of AxiCom. And so everything has been about grounding our culture, you know, in this real world, in this new world dynamic, and recognizing that people have the flexibility to, you know, if they want to, they can go into the office, and if, you know, they don't want to, they can still work remotely. So we're being super flexible.
A lot of this is obviously about communication, isn't it? Emily, as somebody who's been on the receiving end of the training, what's the reaction been like from staff to everything that the agency's doing?
It's been amazing. All the support we felt, it made sure that whether it was just a PowerPoint 101 training or how to public speak on a Zoom call, so you communicate best with your clients, to Coop's training, to in May, we had a staff meeting where there was like a special session, and it ended up being a sheep farmer in Maine, and she walked us around the farm and we just met all of her animals.
Wow.
And I think in May is like this collective breath of like, okay, everything's okay. And so it's the little things, those small details of reaching out and being really transparent about going back to office and giving us the resources we need, such as Coop's training, or how we can get resources that are closer to us to feel supported, whether it to be our best work at work for our clients or just in our personal lives. It's been really amazing and really incredible that most of this has happened again in the last year and a half, where we've all been remote and we've all had to connect via Zoom calls and email, and there hasn't been the ability to sit down in a room and collaborate as much. It's just been really, really helpful to still feel those connection points and feel like I'm still moving my career forward. Just because we're sitting at home in the same place every day and never leaving, we still are moving forward every single day. And that has been really important, I think, especially amongst the junior staff and those who are just beginning their careers, to feel like AxiCom is so invested in their development that they will go out of their way to create opportunities and carve out time from client work, from everything else, where we can just dedicate that time to becoming better PR professionals. It's been really, really important, I think, to all of us.
Fantastic. Coop, high praise for you from both the AxiCom team there. Tell me a bit about the coaching you do with your clients and kind of the biggest pain points for them at the moment?
So I typically work with executive teams, usually directors and above in organizations, that sort of thing. And I've been doing that for 23 years, which blows my mind. But the biggest challenges right now is the uncertainty. So like I said earlier, leadership is COVID is the biggest leadership challenge that most people have faced in their careers. Everybody had back to office plans. Delta variant changed that again. My prediction is the next 18 months are going to have a lot of adaptability for all of us. Going back into the office, trying to figure out, what hours are people there? When people aren't there, are there specific, core hours to work? It's really figuring out how we're going to be the most productive together. With all of these changes and unknowns, and then the environment changing, it seems like on a daily or weekly basis these days. So that's the biggest challenge that people are dealing with. Obviously, the other thing that's happened is COVID has really forced people to evaluate what's important to them, their values. A lot of people have moved, a lot of people have changed jobs. The Great Resignation is something that Deloitte and McKinsey and the Sloan MIT School is talking about. Where in April of this year, we had 4 million people leave their jobs. And they're expecting between 20 and 40% of the workforce to resign sometime this fall. And there's three main reasons for that. One is values have shifted. Two is people just want a different kind of lifestyle than they had before. And three is really about inclusion and fairness. And a lot of those people are leaving because companies made statements about inclusivity and belonging, but they didn't back it up. So people are leaving the organization to say, I want to go somewhere that they actually walk their values. They do what they say they're going to do. And so all those challenges right now really have most leaders, who a lot of times we've got our 3-year or 5-year plan. Now we've got our 3-month plan, and people, that they even have to change that. So that's the major challenges that I'm seeing with most clients.
How do you hang on to talent in times like this? A lot of it's got to do with culture, hasn't it, Coop?
A lot of it has to do with culture, and a lot of it has to do with how people feel. And I know that, we aren't trained on feelings a lot as leaders and managers, those sorts of things. But if someone doesn't feel appreciated, they're not going to stick around. And, sometimes it's a conversation of, hey, I really appreciate the work that you do. But sometimes that's not enough. It's, what have you done for me lately? The other thing that I think employees are really starting to understand is this is an employee market right now. And there is a labor shortage. And people are getting clear on what they want and need to feel successful, to feel appreciated. And that puts added strain and pressure on leaders and managers and company leaders to figure out how do we really take care of people? How do we make sure they feel appreciated? How do we make sure that the work they're doing, there's a direct line between that and what the company stands for, those sorts of things.
And Aaron, what's your experience of hanging on to good talent at AxiCom? I know it's a challenge for everyone across the industry at the moment. What do you do to make them feel appreciated?
Yeah, I mean, Coop hit the nail on the head. From an AxiCom perspective, it's been really thinking about how do we champion all of the great wins, all of the great successes, all the hard work that everyone has been doing. COVID has certainly intensified this feeling of like being on all the time and being connected. We recently instituted something called Recharge Fridays. It's a day off that people get to have once a month where they can and we've told our clients, hey, AxiCom is shutting down on this Friday. Everyone's going to take the day off. We want to celebrate what people are doing on that day. So people are getting to spend, extra time with family. People are going out and buying new cars, which I didn't get a chance to do for quite a while. And there's crazy manufacturing issues going on out there. But the other thing is recognizing the hard work on a week-to-week basis. So people are getting spot gift cards for Amazon, recognizing that folks are putting in extra work and that they're working long hours. So there are moments where, we are just pouring out our support for those people. We're recognizing those people every week. We have a newsletter that's sent by Katie the head of our office to showcase all of the great work that we're doing across our clients and recognize, how much time and energy we're putting into that. So, that's one part of it. And again, I think the other piece of it is just making sure that people feel like they have a place here and they have a stake here. We're listening. Again, that transparency, that communication is key in making sure that we understand the direction and the passions that our staff have, and accommodating those things, right? We cannot, there is no longer a place where we just throw people, not that this is a thing at AxiCom, but that we would throw people on a piece of business and say, hey, go, here's a piece of business that you have no interest in doing whatsoever. It does not align to any of your passions or your career wishes. Good luck. We take a very, very long time at understanding what are those key drivers for our employees, and make sure that they are put on accounts, put on pieces of business that align to their passions and they're able to thrive in that, right? That they have a stake in the work that they're doing for their clients, and that they share the belief system. So, again, I think there's a lot more everyone and ourselves can be doing, but I think those are some great first steps.
So we talked a bit about passion and, in finding, knowing your employees effectively and what buttons to push with them. We've talked a lot about values. Tell me a bit about learning, because that's one of the things we want to talk about today. Is how do you learn on the job when you're just doing the job and not actually surrounded by colleagues, and you don't have those moments of serendipity, those meetings where things suddenly slip into place, those chats over a coffee or whatever, and you're not just soaking up the atmosphere of the office. How difficult is it to overcome? I mean, I know from our experience, you sit down at your desk and you're just getting on with the job and being productive all day. How is it possible now to make sure that people, especially younger people at the beginning of their careers in the first decade or so, are really learning from their peers and superiors and not just doing the job?
Yeah. I think there's a couple of ways to handle that. I mean, one is in the onboarding process, making sure that you're just not bombarding people. I think traditionally, you start your day, you're given a list of all the clients that you're going to be working on, and then throughout that day, you're welcome to this account, and you're going to shadow this person, and the work is all piling up and waiting for you. That's just not something that works for anyone. And having to really rethink the process in which we're putting people on pieces of business. And so we are doing a slow burn onboarding process where each week they may be onboarded to 1 or 2 accounts. And then once we feel like they've gotten a good handle on that, then you get introduced to the next piece of business or the next activity. So thinking about that, I think the value of technology and the use of things like Zoom and Microsoft Teams, it's enabled that communication more frequently. Like it's interesting because while, I was a 9-to-5 office, I say 9-to-5, but this is PR, let's be real. I'm in the office for X number of hours. To your point, you get in, you're in that silo, you're kind of like working, you're being productive. You may have a couple of meetings with some colleagues, but we work on a variety of different businesses. And so there may be some people in the office I just didn't talk to because they don't work on my work stream and we're not intersecting in that sense. That can still very much be a thing in this world that we're living in. But I think the walls have broken down a little more. We started a mentor program during the pandemic, and that has opened the floodgates to exposure for people that don't work on the businesses that I work on, and having those dialogues and conversations with folks and making sure that they don't feel like they're stuck in the silo, that they have access to other people. And I think that is a great opportunity for folks to, bounce ideas off of folks, also see what other pieces of business they may work on. From a learning perspective, again, it gives them access to someone, at a senior level who they don't necessarily interact with on a regular basis. Again, Teams, Zoom, just a constant communication. I'm being pinged regularly by my team with questions and things like that, that they would have, otherwise had to have gotten up and tapped me on the shoulder, because I'm also a headphones guy. And say, hey, Aaron, you mind if we talk for a second? So now it's more fluid. And I think the communication channels are open, which also requires a little bit of discipline for someone like me, where I have to kind of schedule and structure what my day looks like so I can enable those kinds of conversations with folks.
Okay, sounds like you've kind of thought a lot about this and are nailing it as far as possible. Emily, what's your experience been? How hard is it to learn on the job when you're working remotely?
It has been it can be incredibly difficult. I really appreciate that over the last year and a half, AxiCom has really evolved how they do things, making a lot more investments in our training, as well as in the mentorship program, and how we onboard. How our onboarding is completely shifting now to this slow burn, where that was not how it used to be when we were all in office. So I really appreciate that AxiCom is really adapting and evolving, because again, not being able to sit next to the person and learn for them, or just come over to my computer and I'll show you what I'm going to do, or let's go into the conference room, we'll take this call together. Those are the moments. Or I know what was so valuable for me when I started my career was I used to just listen to the different VPs on their phone calls. I had no clue what was going on the other side, but just hearing them and just being a sponge and sucking up their conversations and their strategy was so helpful as I evolved my career and figured out the type of PR person that I wanted to be. And so again, you lose that. And so it's been the extra investments people have had to make in things like a mentorship program, these extra added trainings that take away, hours that would be invested in client work. AxiCom is now investing in us personally growing in a different way than we used to grow. And it's also the leadership. I mean, it's like Aaron said, them making themselves available to us to reach out, answering those pings when I'm sure all they want to do is keep headphones in on do not disturb, but setting up those extra calls, even if they're not your personal manager or a part of the mentorship program. I've been able to reach out to any member of senior leadership at AxiCom over the last year and a half and set up calls. And it could even be about career growth. It could be about one of my clients that I'm really struggling with. It could be about really anything. It could be work-life balance, but making ourselves available, especially to the people who are just starting, to kind of slow down and say, all right, we're going to do this step by step, because something that you would typically be able to take on in person over a day or two of sitting next to me, let's give it a little bit more time, because they're also adjusting to working from home and how their career is supposed to look when their desk is right next to their refrigerator. And there's just a little bit, you have your at-home distractions of, okay, maybe I'll start a little laundry now. It's just a very different environment. So we're all evolving, whether it be those who are learning on the job or senior leadership on how to support us. It's the adaptability, but it has been difficult. But I think it's just the investment in time, investment in reaching out and checking in on people. I think that has made everything else very manageable.
Thanks, Emily. And Coop, what's any kind of broader thoughts on how challenging it is to learn on the job, the advice that you give to your clients and how to enable that in their teams?
Yeah, I agree. It is more difficult now. And one of the things I tell people is you can make the investment now or you can make it later. Because if you don't train people properly, you're going to have the rework. You're going to have to clean up after it. You're going to have to give more feedback later, that sort of thing. So a lot of clients are doing just what AxiCom is doing, is really making investments in making sure, particularly for new employees or people who are starting out in their career, what are the fundamentals? Because if you can learn the fundamentals, then you can learn the other skills on top of that. But if they don't really invest in the fundamentals now, they're really not, they're not setting their employees up for success, and they're setting themselves up for some sort of failure in the future. So a lot of people are making those investments, and I get it. It's hard to do that. It takes away from things that are probably on your plate already. For some clients, they've had to bring in trainers specifically for their new staff because no one had bandwidth to do it, those sorts of things. So sometimes you have to get really creative to manage that, but that's what I'm seeing, particularly for folks in the communication space, is they have lots of new people, lots of younger employees, but they do have to make bigger investments than they normally would during this period because it is harder to train when someone's remote.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think, Coop, from your experience, do you think people who've started their careers or are a little way into their career at the start of lockdown, say 18 months ago, do you think they're likely to have a slower career development or more accelerated just because we're getting through more stuff?
I think part of it depends on the personality. Some people soak it up like a sponge and, kind of are naturals at particular areas of the job. And some people, aren't the best fits for jobs they've been hired for, those sorts of things. So part of it is personality. But I do think just like school-age children have had delayed development over the last year because they don't have the same touch points, they don't have the same interactions, they don't have the same lessons and those sorts of things. I think we are going to see a little bit of lag with a significant portion of new employees who, just didn't have the benefit of the same training, that sort of thing. And the people who are making investments to try to close that gap, they won't have as big a lag, those sorts of things. But I think we will see, a few or a percentage of relatively new or younger employees struggle a little bit more than they would have if they were face to face.
Yeah, interesting. Aaron, do you have any more thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I think it's something for us to keep a close eye on, and making sure that, to Emily's point, that we're continuing to make those investments and keep an eye on folks. I think consistently pulsing folks that may be struggling or having a lot more patience than we probably had in the past is going to be important. But I think with the resources that we have at our disposal, and again, like bringing great people in like Coop and others, we will get there. And I think people will adapt accordingly, and we'll be better for it.
And Aaron, just
just something to add to what Aaron said. I think it's really important to look at quality of work, because often, particularly younger employees, they don't always know that they can, or they don't feel comfortable saying I'm struggling or those sorts of things. And if you can really look at the quality of work, it will give an indicator often much earlier than people will raise their hand for help, to give you an indicator that, oh, we might need to intervene here. We might need to support them in different ways. We need to ask some tough questions here, those sorts of things.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Coop. And I'm just going to come to you all with one last question, which is the top tip question. So I'm going to come to you, Emily, first. What was your top tip be on how to make sure that you're carrying on learning and your teams are carrying on learning in a hybrid and remote working environment in this industry?
From a junior perspective, I would just say, reach out, raise your hand, volunteer. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. And just, be a sponge and really just jump in where you can. The best way to learn it is to do it, make some mistakes, and take feedback. So just enjoy the process of learning and being on different accounts and being thrown in different places and right into the fire, and those really exciting moments where you get it right. Celebrate your wins, learn from the feedback you get, and just never stop raising your hands.
Love it. Never stop raising your hands. Aaron, what's your top tip in making sure people are carrying on learning in lockdown?
Yeah, recognize that work is no longer a box that triangles, circles have to fit into. The pandemic has broken down the walls of that box, and now you have to make work your own. Keep the things that inspire you front and center. Be vocal. Make sure that you have the openness and the transparency with your direct managers and all levels of leadership, because we don't know what we don't know. But it's also on our shoulders to make sure we're pinging all staff members and making sure that they're feeling that they're getting adequate training, that they're getting adequate resources, and that they're being heard. I think it is a symbiotic relationship that we have to completely recognize and understand that, things are continuing to be fluid and we're all working through it. But, I think that, the transparency part of it and making sure that they can communicate and feel an openness to the place that they work, that they feel like they have that, because otherwise they're not going to be heard.
Fantastic. Thank you, Aaron. And Coop, I'm going to give you the last word. What's your top tip on making sure teams are carrying on learning effectively in lockdown?
I think the most important thing is, and this is everybody from the CEO or the president of the company all the way down to the most junior employee, is create your own development plan. Don't leave that to someone else, and be really honest with yourself about what you're good at. And even those things you're good at, you still need to improve. You still have to remain competitive. And the things that you have a gap on or you're not as strong on, really create your own development plan and ask for help, ask for resources, those sorts of things, because a lot of times the resources are there. Yes, people are busy, and I know it can seem like a burden to ask for help or ask for those resources, but it's in the organization's best interest, and it's in your manager's best interest to make sure that your skills are up to par and that you remain a competitive person in the marketplace, and that AxiCom remains competitive as well. So it's really important that everyone has their own development plan. And you may even want to ask your peers or your manager for feedback on that plan as well, because they may see some blind spots that you may have or some gaps that you may not be aware of.
Okay, so take charge of your own development, never stop raising your hands, and keep moving with this very fluid situation. Who knows where we're going to be this time next year. All three of you, thank you so much for joining me today for the third in our videocast series of AxiCom on being human in a tech-enabled world. It's great to see you all. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.